everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here at the Finance Committee meeting for the Cincinnati School Board, and we welcome all that are going to be participating, all that are going to be viewing, and our efforts are to be sure that we have about a 90-minute meeting and no more than that, and we really want to do some major discussion, and we have some important presentations. So if Member Melanie Bates will lead us with the pledge, we will get started.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Bates. Really appreciate it. And we're going to adjust our agenda somewhat because we are going to be adding, fortunately, and I really appreciate Preschool Promise folks alerting me to that. We are going to go over their budget so that the first time we're looking at all of this, at the whole board, finance will have sort of a heads up. And indeed, that was part of our plan last month to do that this month. So again, I appreciate you catching me on that one. And let's, since they are guests, let's, if you are ready, Mr. Blanco, if you want to start with that.
No problem at all. I would love to. Thank you.
Great. And then we will have 3 items under other, and that I think will be the adjustments for the agenda. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So if we can have the first slide, the theme of the presentation is basically a return to our levels before COVID hit us. So what you'll see in the first slide, let's see if Rob can put that up. Well, I'll talk through it until he gets it. But basically, we have a budget that's about $2.5 million larger than our forecast for this year. And our forecast for this year is, oh, here we go. Okay. So key points, tuition assistance is a return to fiscal year 20 levels, which is basically pre-COVID levels. We have an extended learning session now in our budget in the front and the back end. We have a 3% annual increase to the cost of education, which is part of the master agreement. It has already been arranged with the treasurer so that the district is also taking that 3%. And I'll wait for the new items of fiscal year 22 at the end. Let me just jump to quality improvement, which is where we help community providers raise their quality to 3, 4, or 5 stars, considered high quality. The coaching returns to pre-COVID levels as well. At the cost to quality level, which is how we help teachers by increasing their wages and trying to reduce turnover is really our goal. We have a dedicated program manager who is much better able to contact the centers that could either be supported by teacher promise grants, those in the tuition assistance level, or by staff support funds, which are those that are not in tuition assistance, but in quality improvement. So we have a growth in that area of the utilization, really, of those opportunities. And then we have set aside $75,000 as a contingency for post-COVID-19 restart. We're not sure how the community providers will be restarting, what the help they will need, but we wanted to set aside some funds to acknowledge that. Now, the 2 new items for fiscal year 22 are a welcome pack for students, and these include educational materials for each student. That's in the tuition assistance area. In the quality improvement area, we have new QI coaching, which is really specialized, narrow coaching for those programs that received their stars before COVID, but might go down or have gone down really to 2, 1, or no stars to help them regain those stars. Those programs behave differently than just a standard program that's coming in the front door, because they've already been at high quality. So we created a budget item to help those programs. If we can go to the next slide, I'll show you the typical graphs that you've become accustomed to with me, with nice and cool colors. But I'll call your attention to the upper left, which is where we have the number of TA students that we expect, meaning tuition assistance students. The dark blue line is where we were up till March of this year. And the yellow line is where we expect next year to be. The green line right behind the yellow line is where we were in fiscal year 20. So that's why I say it's almost a return to pre-COVID levels, because even in the tuition assistance area, the number of students we expect to be supporting looks very similar. If we can go to the next slide, I'll give a little bit more information about quality improvement. And the line I'd like to call your attention to here again is the upper left. That orange line represents the number of converted high quality seats. If you remember, our mission together is to make high quality preschool accessible, not only financially for the parents, but also geographically for those parents, meaning creating more seats in the community so that the parent has better opportunity to take their child either whether it's close to home or close to work or somewhere in between. So in the coming year, we expect to generate 536 by the end of the year cumulative new high quality seats. And what you'll see below that is how they're split by type of provider, either by centers or by type A and type B providers. If we move to the next slide, I'll present the cost of quality portion. And here really what I wanted to highlight was the significant amount that we're spending on teacher promise grants to help keep teacher turnover from occurring. And again, these are 85, we expect on average to have 85 teachers being supported every month for the full year, and helping to reduce the turnover driven by low wage. And we do that on a monthly basis to make sure the teacher is still employed there. This is not a front end payment, but every month we check to make sure that he or she is still at the same center, providing the lead teacher education to those students. So if we go to the next slide, I will show you now tons of numbers. This is our draft budget, which was presented, as you can see on the left, to our board 2 days ago. There were no comments coming out of that board presentation about any substantial changes that were requested. So it's not yet approved because we wanted to join with you at the June 7th hearing, be available to answer any questions. We don't expect to present, just be available to the community to ask any questions. And then should everything remain the same after that hearing, then we'll just go back to our board for an approval. But basically, as I alluded to in the beginning, we have about a $9.7 million budget for the next fiscal year, which is roughly 2.5 million. That's the lower right-hand total blue amount, larger than our current forecast, which is the 7.2 right beside it. And there's some reconciling items there, or key changes versus the forecast. Really, the largest one is $1 million increase, which you can see in the blue top right-hand corner to the tuition assistance level. And that goes with the increased number of students that we will have in our programs. So now that I've used up my 3 minutes from the egg timer, are there any questions?
You did very, very well. Questions, anyone?
I have a question.
Yes, please, Madam Treasurer.
Hector, Did you all have a conversation about the fact that the next year's budget, 9.7, is more than half of the preschool expansion set aside? And so that if the district also uses half of it, then we're going to start dipping into that prior year cash balance?
We did not have a discussion about that, actually.
Okay.
We discussed how it was slightly lower than the one we had going into this year, but I don't think that generated any questions from the rest of the people. But I'm glad you bring it up here, because that is true. We will have to do that.
We need to have a conversation about how that gets done. So, okay, just wanted to make sure.
Thank you for bringing that up.
When might you all try to look at that and figure that out? Is that does that need to happen in these next couple of months, or is it more sensitive than that?
When's the next FCNA meeting, Hector?
6/1, I believe.
Can we put it on the agenda for that?
You bet. We will. I'll make sure it's on the agenda. Thank you.
Jen, could you explain for the public and the rest of us as well what that means?
Yeah, so what we did in the $48 million levy, we put a $15 million set aside to expand preschool. And the first year of collections, we used very little of that because we started collecting in January, but they didn't actually start as the private providers until August. We had about a half of a year of tax collections that nobody used, knowing that at the end of that 5-year cycle, the levy would end mid-year, and we would need that money to help supplement the last year of revenue had we not passed a new levy. So we have this cash balance that hasn't been used over the years as they were ramping up, but now we both have expanded beyond the 50%. Like if we just took that $15 million and split it in half for both entities, we both have gone beyond that cost. And so we're going to be dipping into that money that was reserved. And the organizations just need to have a conversation about it so that one organization doesn't think they're overdoing the other organization. It's just a matter of transparency. Does that make sense?
And in addition, if you remember from my first few presentations about 3 years ago, we also had that carryover policy, which included not just those first 6 months, but every year we've underspent. Right. So it's not just that 7 million, but some more funds that are in there.
Yeah, thank you for adding to that.
Yep.
After or as a result of your conversation that you're going to have, what policy issues or agreement issues would need to be dealt with, or is this merely a financial collaborative effort? Does this require policy changes, or?
No, I don't think so.
No. Yep.
Go ahead. You agree, Hector?
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a cash flow issue.
Yeah, it's just a matter of publicly reporting it and to both the entities so we can monitor the balance as we move forward. At some point, we're going to chew that up and we're going to continue to grow, and we're going to have to be dipping into other sources of funding to continue to fund the expanded preschool. Right?
But that is, I would expect that to be a few years down the road since we've accrued a significant underspent balance in that joint bucket.
That would be great to be, to watch that and see that, especially the new accrued amounts. Mr. Jackson, any questions, comments?
No. Thank you again for the partnership. We're glad it's all working out. Our budget, went through our board and sailed through. And so just looking forward to bringing more success stories and being good stewards of the funds and promoting preschool expansion.
That's great. Ms. Bates or Mr. Messer, anybody, or Superintendent, you cool with this? All right, excellent. The only thing I get a couple of public questions very quickly about whatever it is that people are thinking about doing at the national level regarding preschool. I don't know what to answer when people say, how does that impact us? And my best answer is I don't know, and I don't think it does. So right now, anyway, is there any word from you all that are experts as to whatever it is that the national government's trying to do or thinking about doing that would impact us?
I would say for us, we're just monitoring it and making sure that we know what's happening at the state level as well. We know there's been additional, initial issue of guidance from HHS on the American Recovery Plan, but I think it is premature to even assess what that impact may be until we know what is coming for preschool education and childcare down from originally just the Omnibus Act that happened in December. We just got to the point that we're assessing and distributing that for our preschools. So I think continuing to monitor it, working in partnership to talk about it, but premature to even speculate on the impact that that could have.
I totally agree, and I guess one of the action items then would be to continue that collaboration, because the collaboration can be in part the lobbying and keeping each other informed and figuring out how to present that united front. And also it's the equivalent of being shovel ready as to where we are versus where most communities and districts are. It's just very similar to, as the superintendent worked out all the health arrangements. That when you're ready to act, when you've laid out the infrastructure, we can be first in line if we play our cards right and work together. That's great. Any last minute questions or comments regarding preschool? Well, then we will move on. Thank you again for making sure we put this on the agenda. I really am appreciative of that.
As always, good to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Believe it or not, and I know Mr. Johnson won't believe this, we're actually going to transportation closer to the top of the agenda instead of waiting to have it be at the end of agenda. So with us, we have Mr. Johnson, and we have Sarah Trimble Oliver as well. And I guess in part, we are going to be talking about transportation, and our interest initially on the finance is the budget aspect, the contract aspect, and where you think we are regarding the close of this year and the June summer scholars, and most importantly, where you think we are for next year, financially and service-wise. And I don't know who wants to start, if it's Mr. Johnson or Trimble Oliver or whomever.
So I guess I could start, and just so I got all your points that you want me to touch on, where we're at financially for this school year, as well as the service correlated to that for this school year, and then in preparation for summer scholars and where we are at financially with that. And then lastly, the anticipation for next school year and the financial implications of that work as well. Those are the three big bucket areas.
That's right now, that's it. And just talking in terms of the contracts that will be part of our next year, and we appreciate you delaying in part, or at least I believe you have delayed in part some of the things that we were interested in trying to do earlier this year. But if you'll catch us up on all those and get us aware of what we need to know.
All right. So thank you for the opportunity to go somewhat first today. Really appreciate that. As you know, at the last meeting, we were also going to do a presentation in front of the Health and Safety Committee, in which we did do that presentation. I will share with you some of the good data points regarding the services for this year. In the last 10 days, we have been averaging roughly about 85-86% on-time performance. That's within 4 minutes, which is a very high number of service that this district has not had in years. We are continuing to use our QI processes to actually meet goal. And so our goal is, on the last day of school, we have the opportunity to meet goal of our QI project. And so that is to, again, ensure that the services are matching the funds that we are paying for, and holding those vendors accountable. Where we're at as far as financial spending for the rest of this year, we are on trend to still be under budget. And we are working closely with the Treasurer's Office and disencumbering any funds that we are not going to be using, so that can go back into the general fund for other purposes for the upcoming summer work. For summer school, we have successfully routed all the students for summer scholars, I should say, excuse me. We've held meetings with our specialized groups such as KISSER and went over all their routing, because one of their wishes was that every KISSER student actually were able to attend Summer Scholars Program. So we have 100% of their students routed and ready to go. All of the transportation for everyone else is set to be sent out and communicated to the families, to the schools, and the students for a start date of June 1. We are putting together the finalized budget of what it is going to cost for summer scholars to submit that over to the Treasurer Department to be part of the CARES Act funding to cover that cost. So that will not hit general funds for that. Then moving over into the big elephant in the room, as we like to call it, is our contract negotiations for that 1-year extension. We have listened to you guys very strongly and earnestly, have been working behind the scenes with our vendors to establish those issues that I raised beforehand regarding our contracts, surrounding professional development for those transportation personnel and working with our students, to the equipment and resources, which includes the vehicles and most importantly, the drivers, and making sure that we have adequate amount of drivers to do the work at hand. And then lastly, our service expectations, which is a continuation of our hard work that we have been doing over the last couple of years. And so we are holding very firmly, tying up the loose ends of this new language, vetting it out by our general counsel. We've held a couple of meetings with Dan. I've held several meetings with our vendors and their counsel and their leadership, talking about these terms and everything. I am confident to present that everyone is invested in ensuring our kids are receiving a high quality service. I think what we've been able to demonstrate this year amongst a pandemic is that we could provide a quality service, and now we're driving for a high quality service going into next year. And we have the data to kind of support that going forth. And so what our plan is to follow our natural process as a district and submit those contracts for full board approval and review sometime in June, and go from there. And we hope that we have you guys' blessings and support. And of course, if you guys have any outstanding questions or concerns or inquiries that you guys want regarding those contracts, I am always available to answer those questions or bring those questions forward to our vendors to make sure that's included into the language.
Thank you. Mr. Messer, Ms. Bates, do you have any questions, comments? I don't have very many. I would start with just what are these new terms that you mentioned regarding the extension. I mean, I don't need to have all the specificity, but I know that part of our concern, or that you expressed over a number of months, was our inability necessarily, based upon the contract language, to hold the vendors accountable. How is that, at least, and we're talking about just a 1-year extension, but a reviewed and revised contract for all, is that correct?
Correct, and we'll capture all of that within an MOU that will act as an addendum to the existing contract and striking out that language that we want changed. And so a couple of highlights I like to note to that in regards of holding the drivers or the vendors accountable is putting in contingency basis for some of them where if they don't meet a threshold of on-time performance, then we get a lower rate that we actually are able to charge them for that said service. We also are going to double down on that language where if they do not meet the service requirements as we set forth, which is centered around on-time performance, that we will ultimately remove that route package from that said vendor and give it to one of our higher performing vendors so we can make sure that our students are receiving, again, a high quality service. other key things in there that is important to note is our service, our customer experience, and we want to make sure that we are staffed appropriately to handle all inquiries that come into our office. And this is to make sure that they are providing a level of call center agents that's necessary for the volume of work that we're giving them, as well as making sure those agents are able to address the concerns or inquiries of our stakeholders, specifically those who are ESL families and having multi-bilingual agents on staff for us as a district. The other thing is transportation personnel is extending out the professional development throughout the school year and not just doing a shot in the arm training at the beginning of the school year. We want to make sure that we're touching base with all these providers who and staff who are working with our students throughout the school year, kind of just like the school does with teacher professional development days and paraprofessional development days. We feel that same work is needed for our transportation personnel and interacting with our students. So those are some big high-level highlights of that new language that's coming through.
And if I could, I probably am wrong about this, but I thought the contracts that we had built into them already some forms of accountability and lack of service, and then being able to get money. So if that indeed existed, how much did we get regarding them not being able to provide the service? Or how have we strengthened the new edition of the extended contract so that we are able to realize this amount of money when indeed the service is not able to meet our demands or needs or requirements?
So what you're speaking of is the liquidated damages. We still have that built into the contract, but those come with thresholds as far as limitations. We can't exceed $5,000 per month for that. And so the concessions that I'm talking about now will hit across the board for the total month, and it's not going to be contingent upon a threshold of $5,000. So that's one of the clear changes with these concessions that we're having in place, because it's directly tied to the rate. It is not something that we didn't have to spend man hours to invoice that vendor and bill them for those liquidated damages to come back. We will be taking that right off the cut.
All right, it sounds good. And does that pertain to the van folks as well as the yellow bus service folks? Or is that just for the yellow bus?
One of the things that we're doing is reallocating and making a requirement for our van operators to have GPS in there. And that's one of the reasons why we had such poor quality service, because we couldn't monitor the service that's being delivered. And so we're making it a requirement that all van services are going to have to be equipped with GPS. And with that, we could hold them accountable with that same stipulation as we do with the yellow bus, including with the concessions and the liquidated damages.
That's great. I would ask it. I asked it last month. Do we have any knowledge as to the sale of First Student changing how we do business with First Student?
So that's right. The sale did come through. I heard personally directly from the president and CEO, Paul Oslin. We talked about it. They don't feel like there's going to be any shift or any new practices that will impact our operations as Cincinnati Public Schools. It actually might enhance our offering because it is a holding company that has purchased First Student, and they have interest in other type of vehicles such as alternative fuel vehicles such as electric vehicles, which might change the scope of type of vehicles that we have operating here in Cincinnati. And we'll also play into Green Cincinnati, which is also an initiative that we as a district are working on.
Okay. And then let me ask this. Do we have any knowledge about the 7th and 8th grade decision regarding Metro coming from Columbus?
So House Bill 110 is still out there. It did, it passed through the House. I think it's going through the Senate right now. It does look like it's going to be passed. The language specifically targets students attending community or non-pub schools. It doesn't really relate it to students within a public school district. With that said, it prohibits them from using mass transit unless there's an agreement between us as the district of residence and them as the school of attendance. I have been on meetings with the state, voiced our concerns regarding giving the power, quote unquote, of decision making to those chartered schools on what mode of service that we give those students. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the language within House Bill 110 clearly states that we have to come up with a plan, we being the public school district, the district of residence. And in that plan, we can make that determination whether or not we're going to say, hey, we're going to put them all on payment in lieu, or what mode of service or how we are going to transport them. I'll be fully prepared to present some viable options for us to go forth as a district once this is finalized going forward from there. But aside from that, the only other language that's in there is the stipulation that students route on a public transit cannot have more than one transfer. And so many of our routes, and given Cincinnati region and SORTA, you could get from across town with one or less transfers. So that is not a concern for us.
That's great. So keep us informed of that. And I know when you do report to the board, it would be helpful to be able to show, and I see Mr. Hoynes here, to report to us how the contract extensions or contracts themselves are improvements for our accountability. And I think that would be very helpful to almost, I won't say redline it or anything like that, because that has way too many thoughts, but it will be helpful for the board to believe that there have been improvements, and probably those improvements seen in writing. Also, how much the Hamilton County Education Service folks are involved. And then we'll talk a little bit about Metro in just a second, but I see Member Messer has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I've got Melanie and the other in my office. I don't know if it's echoing or not. I'm getting a little
okay
echo.
With us.
Okay. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you to Mr. Johnson and the entire team for the improvements. And we got a little bit more of the other detail at Health and Safety. So you've been kind of two committees here in recent succession, but I will say based on that and this, clearly some major advancements forward, a great story to tell here. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And then I'm just curious, what does it look like for bus service for summer scholars? Is it significantly reduced? Is the population that have signed up our typical bus users? What does that look like between our standard school year and then the summer scholars?
Good. So we're typically running about 33% of what we typically do during the school year, which is also almost 3 times what we typically do during the summer. So it is an increase of service levels for us, but it's also a decrease compared to what we do overall for the school year. I think our total numbers was roughly between 8,000 and 9,000 students that are going to be attending summer scholars. So if you look at it on a non-pandemic year, we typically transport roughly about 40,000 students. That's including the non-CPS schools as a whole. So that's kind of where we're at with it. We have about approximately, I'm going to say 2,500, 3,000 students that will be on Metro this summer, going to the high school programs. And that's where we're at. We're ready full bore to hit it to put those buses on the road.
Thank you.
And for Metro, we feel comfortable where we are with their efforts as they redesign the Metro SORTA experience as well.
Absolutely. We actually just had a meeting with Metro this week. We had a meeting with them last week. We'll be meeting with them weekly all the way until mid-June. We're actually anticipating to have all the routes built and finalized for next school year by the end of June, which is almost a full month earlier than normal. Great partnership. My last meeting with them is actually to talk about training for their operators in interacting with our students and everything. And so we are working together to come up with a consolidated training program that they could implement, centered around communication techniques with our students and how to de-escalate matters when they arise on those buses appropriately with our students. So some great work and great partnership with Metro is underway.
That's good to know. And then another kind of, I'll take that just a second. Another action item is that when you are talking about the budget, it is helpful for us to see it by vendor, by student group. If you're getting the drift, I know that you guys have produced that before, and it's been very helpful for the board to see how much is being spent for particularly our special needs kids, or how much is being spent for, on Metro versus Yellow Bus versus vans and what have you. My last concern, besides it all working this year, is the customer service piece and the phone customer service when people call in. That still is an issue that I think is second only to the safety issue. And I didn't know someone that started to speak up and I interrupted them. I don't know if that was Mr. Trimble Oliver or someone else. Can't see everybody. But go ahead.
Well, I think Sarah chimed in. She's about to chime in, so I'll let her go ahead and speak and give me a little break.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to add, we are on top of that, Ms. Bolton. We just had a project planning session for the improvements for the call center and the customer service for this summer. And so we anticipate some great improvements before fall.
That is great to hear. That would be wonderful. And if we can have that breakdown regarding the budget, and I guess we're going to find the good news or the bad news as to how much transportation will be costing in this fiscal year fairly soon, and that will be helpful. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? And it will be great if this sort of presentation, and I'll mention this to President Jones, some sort of not super detailed, but certainly categorized and explanatory kind of presentation could maybe happen as part of the overall vote on the budget, because I know the transportation piece has been a board priority for a number of years, and we want to start well. And we are now into our, as I think you mentioned, as our preschool people mentioned, the post-COVID experience as we return, because it's not all about learning loss. It's also about returning to the service, and for us, making the service even better than it was pre-COVID. And we appreciate that. Mr. Messer or Ms. Bates, any questions, or treasurer or superintendent? Mr. Hoyne, you're good? Good. Mr. Johnson, any last minute comments?
No, just a thank you to you as the chairperson of the Finance Committee and committee members for pushing us towards excellence. And so we greatly appreciate the feedback that you have given us over the last several months about ensuring our students are taken care of with our transportation vendors.
We appreciate that, and we'll keep pushing and watching. But the actual effort to pursue excellence, I think, mostly is to the credit of the superintendent. So I would hope that we can keep this going and have a great opening. And we've got some more months to worry about it and think about it. So appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Treasurer, I think you're up next with a whole bunch of stuff. You have the strategic plan strategies, the budget piece, which is the building the budget, and new shore, old shore, and equity budget initiatives, and down to your 5-year forecast, so that we have some intro. So we want to have a little discussion among us as to what was reported, and also anybody has some questions regarding what you're going to be talking about, we'll do it as we go.
Okay, well, so for the public's purpose, we did a presentation last night, or yesterday afternoon-ish, on the current status of the general fund budget, and today's committee meetings or the next committee meetings of each of the committees was supposed to give feedback and discussion. See if there's any questions we can answer or a different way to present or information that's still needed. And so I would open up the floor for questions or comments.
Yes, do any board members have any reactions to some of the things that we've heard yesterday before we move to the 5-year forecast? I have one real quick question on Superintendent. This kind of goes to a part of it. I mean, is there, considering pre-COVID, post-COVID, and COVID, are we still thinking that we will need to do some of the initial arrangements, the really good idea regarding Walnut and outdoor space? Are we still planning on moving in that direction?
So, and I'm going to please ask Sarah to pop in, but we plan to have the dome in place, which will be over some tennis courts to be able to use that for lunch space as well as study hall space. And then when the construction is completed, which is it's an 18 to 24-month construction for the addition to Walnut, then that dome will serve as an indoor tennis court. But the idea is to have all the students on the campus for the upcoming school year at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I just would add that you'll see in the treasurer's report Monday night is the first contract for the design services for that dome, the dome that will be used for lunch and study hall.
Thank you. Ms. Bates.
This is way, way off topic, but I don't know if it came up last night. But after the board decided to level the entrance scores, someone decided that there's going to be a wait list at Walnut, and we don't know who's administering the wait list, who's getting in. You know, is it first? We did away with first come, first serve. I'm just throwing that out because I wasn't there yesterday, and you know, if it was at the principal level, somebody has to discuss this. That this is a policy issue and not a school issue. I was just very, pretty upset when I saw that email from that parent.
Perhaps the superintendent can respond.
So the principal has been advised quite some time ago that the students who met the Walnut Hills requirement, the testing requirement, who live within the Cincinnati Public Schools boundary should be admitted to Walnut Hills. So I will personally follow up with him today about the wait list. It's not coming from central office at all. And so if you recall, I think that there were an additional 149 students as a result of level setting the test score criteria allowed to entry into that school. And so I will follow up with him in just a couple of moments to make sure that there's no confusion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bates, for bringing that up. We did not bring it up last night, and you're right. A waiting list is something that was certainly not ever anticipated. You do wonder why we've had to be quite so persistent about some of this. So we appreciate the superintendent looking into it. So we will have the dome, and let me ask about the extension of the building of Walnut Hills. Treasurer started to list some of those as part of the initiative. We have, and there were several that were listed. Did the treasurer respond to what those were and repeat for the public?
If I remember correctly in the list, it was the Walnut Hills addition, the dome, and the dome, not the other, Pleasant Ridge and Hyde Park. And then I know there was discussion about, and I don't know how firm the discussions are about Hughes Annex use or even Jacobs yet. So those are just, I don't know, Sarah, do you want to, am I wrong?
So you named the correct three: Walnut, Hyde Park, Pleasant Ridge. We are still having discussions and site visits of the Hughes Annex as well as a possible use for the future.
Great. Could I also ask, I know that we're carrying smaller than what we would hope enrollment at Spencer, and indeed to properly staff that and do what we need to do, I would hope that somewhere there we would be adding Spencer to review as to how we might do that sort of expansion in order to continue the program and properly outline the facilities that they need. And I know that community has asked for some, especially in high school. Perhaps the superintendent or Sarah Trimble Oliver could respond to the Spencer piece.
Well, I'll respond to the enrollment and the staffing levels. If Sarah wants to respond to any kind of an expansion. I do remember that an expansion of Spencer came up, I would say 2 years ago, or yeah, I think it was 2 years ago. And parents were coming to the hearing of the public, and the decision was made to continue to move on with the grade levels up through 12th grade, and not to offer any of those high school classes on another site. Everyone was very clear that that's not what they wanted to have happen. If you recall, though, the request from the community at the time was a $11 million expansion of that school. And there were some renovations or updates that were made to be able to accommodate high school courses better. I will say, though, that we have done some right sizing of that school in terms of staffing because their enrollment is extremely low. So they're around 300, sometimes dipping below the 300 mark. And so I would just imagine that the administration would want to monitor that and make any or advise the board as to whether or not an expansion is actually needed considering the number of kids who are there. So, for example, at one point, some staff was taken away from that school because there weren't enough kids to justify the number of people who were there. And so unless the school significantly grows in terms of enrollment, it doesn't justify expanding onto the building.
Is it possible, if the board members agree, is it possible to kind of have an action item? It sounds like the administration is already kind of investigating and researching that issue as to whether or not, I mean, we've made promises that we want to keep, but not necessarily sustain beyond what is reasonable to sustain. So if we can have a kind of a report about the future of Spencer so that the kids are served and the staff is able to continue, whether it's another building, whether it's different grade levels, but still with the same concept or whatever, if maybe that's something that ask the administration to deal with. I don't want to lose the concept. I think it's served people very well, but maybe there are ways to rethink where we are based upon the enrollment itself and maintaining the concept, but knowing the cost is significant. Can we make that an action item, members? Is that something that you're comfortable to look into? Okay, great. So other buildings. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Because I will say I left last night thinking, as we're looking at all the planning, like what was going to happen with some of these future projects. So glad to know the dome is on its way. That'll be some additional space, and then. As far as the Walnut Hills, Hyde Park, and Pleasant Ridge, question mark. So is the assessment such that the pandemic impact has not changed our thinking from an enrollment standpoint that we would still need to go forward with those expansions? Specifically like Hyde Park, I know once we kind of work through that sibling issue and you combine that with the fact that we lost some students in that school, is it still such that we should be expanding there?
Yes, Mr. Messer, even more so now that distancing is more important. And those are the 3 top priority schools that were already in need of more space and now are even more in need.
Great. Thank you.
Perhaps I appreciate Mr. Messer what you said. I was wondering kind of the same thing, and I guess it works out that way. Also, because money is tight, doesn't seem always like it is, but since money is tight and we have some opportunities to have some monies go towards our expansion, it'd be good to know what can actually be coming from the CARES Act or whatever as to how we can use that for our facility expansion or improvement. I think that's absolutely critical. And I would also say that it's not unreasonable for us to see, is there property, as something Ms. Bates often talks about or has talked about, and that is of divesting ourselves of some property or investing regarding property. And it would be great to be able to talk a little bit about that as it relates to CARES, as well as anything the treasurer wants to say about COPS. So maybe if you guys could have a little bit of a discussion or share some information with us, that would be great.
So Sarah and I were on a call with the ODE programmatic experts on CARES this afternoon to get some clarity around allowable expenses.
Great.
And as long as the initiatives are tied to preparing for responding to COVID, we're okay. But so some examples, like they said, was, well, if you've always had this plan for years, then it probably wasn't COVID related. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that we're doing it because of COVID and social distancing and learning, preventing learning loss and prevention of virus. Not because we've had this expansion plan all along and boom, here we have some money that we need to do it, right?
Right.
So we need to do it for those reasons. We did get a lot of better understanding and we learned some new information in that the second and third CARES Act require, the second or just the third, Sarah? The third CARES Act requires stakeholder input in planning. And there's a requirement on that documentation in order when we submit the plan. And so we put that on the agenda for Tuesday's PLT meeting to talk about that stakeholder engagement process, because we'll have 90 days from May 24th in order to submit our plan that includes that stakeholder engagement. And so we'll get right on that and we'll keep you informed.
Does that stakeholder engagement have to be like from this time forward? It can't count on the historic or whatever we've done previously about the same topic, right?
It's a possibility because the substantially approved date, they backdated to March 13th of 2020. So I think we would be okay in using some more recent things that, like some of the things that we listed on the presentation last night. But I think we need a little bit more specificity on those particular funds and the use of those. I would feel a lot better having that as the detail.
So going back that far, it could be even based upon some of the strategic planning regarding growth. If we refresh.
No, because that's not the strategic planning regarding growth has nothing to do with COVID. It was pre-COVID.
Okay, that's good to know.
So, yep.
Mr. Messer, I interrupted you, sir.
Yeah, well, no, just one last question. So I love all this growth stuff, and nice to be post-pandemic and be thinking about these things, which is great. What is the soonest that we could see a shovel hit the ground for Walnut?
Well, first we'd have to get, but before you start, let's talk about the approval plan first. So you have to get the stakeholder approval plan together, get it adopted by ODE, and then you can start spending the money in order to create the design and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so we have targeted stakeholder issues for PRM, Walnut, and Hyde Park? Would those three all fit?
Yep.
Okay.
If they all have space issues, they need expansion due to social distancing and virus protection, remote learning, whatever. Yes. But we have to include it in our plan that's to be submitted in August. So the stakeholder engagement might be a little
problem.
Yeah, okay.
I think that might be a grace period for us, as long as we get started as soon as possible, I guess. But Sarah Kimball Oliver, you had something to say there to add.
Yeah, so I was going to answer the direct question Mr. Messer asked is there is going to be a multi-month design process. So the shovels won't be hitting the ground, for somewhere in the neighborhood of, could even be 6 to 9 months. But that design process, Robin Brandon will be leading that and will involve the school principal, who will pull together a community design team, actually design what the expansion will be.
Great. I think there's a lot of people looking forward to this. The pandemic opened the eyes for a lot of people of the space constraints, and I think a lot of people thought, well, why haven't they done anything about that? Why haven't they talked about it? Well, of course, we had to say, pre-pandemic, there are quite a few presentations by the administration on the plans. It's just sometimes you get a pandemic, you have to do other priorities. So when we launch this, I think it'll be very well received.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Could I add, too, that if we're doing that regarding Walnut, is the same sort of plan in place for PRM? And have we already gone through the plan for Hyde Park?
No, they will both also. They will both also have a design process as well with the community.
Great. And those can be on parallel tracks in the same kind of time frame. Great. Well, when we do the Walnut, let's make sure we don't make really small classes for big kids. I mean, I know we're just be aware of that. Madam Superintendent, I'm sorry, I interrupted you too.
So I believe that when Sarah and I talked about this last in terms of the expansion, that it's that these buildings would be projected to be able to open in August of 2024. It's about 18.
Maybe not exactly August, but not exactly August, but it depends on the design, of course. So that was an estimate.
I think the superintendent had the correct date. And just make it so, right? I think that's not even down the road. That's just a real quick trip to get to that.
Well, now we may not be able to afford the wood.
I know.
We're going to have to
wait. Exactly. Talk about post-COVID
in the world.
You know it. And I hope that we're kind of anticipating. Well, I know we have anticipated that. Any other comments about last night's great budget presentation? And I appreciated, too, that academic return on investment effort that has been made, that was presented last night. I don't think we spent enough time on it. Maybe we can return, because I'm calling it, well, I know that Sarah Kimball Oliver worked on this with others, but I'm calling it the Melanie Bates Memorial Chart. Because the first meeting I ever attended, and I wasn't even on the board yet, was about return on investment. How do we match the dollars to the actual achievement and our mission? And Ms. Bates, that was her thing. She kept asking about that, and it looks like you're starting to get the kind of rubric that would be helpful. So I appreciate it. Anything else before we move on? Oh, Madam Superintendent.
Yes, I just want to add, just for your edification, that if you recall a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we talked about Walnut, Pleasant Ridge, and Hyde Park, there was a projected dollar figure for construction. Just realize that number will probably significantly change. Just so I want you to remember those numbers and say, this is how much it's going to cost.
Very well said. Yes. Ms. Bates.
Yes, and back to one of my favorite subjects, and that's the disposition of property, but wouldn't this be a good time to consider putting Rawson House on the market? I mean, we might be able to make a handy little profit on that, enough to redo that coach house in back of Fairview.
Oh, I see what you're well, we'll certainly think about it, but we've decided 3 different times to keep Rawson for what needs we may have.
Not in this environment. I mean, well, we could very well make a killing on that property.
You can make a killing, but you also have a very tight campus at Cairns, and as you said, you have to do something regarding I guess we do Fairview. But yeah, we can talk about it again, but you know, we keep making the same decision once everybody gets together on the Rawson piece. Which leads me to the last thing I want to say about facilities is this outdoor piece. Since we do have a network that actually wants to audit and has been auditing sort of our territory, and to Melanie's point, the carriage house behind Fairview, the woods that surround Parker Woods, all those things. I know people that outside network is kind of going around looking at campus. So that probably perhaps could fit too with some of those CARES dollars, right, Jen, or not? For outdoor?
Possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Members, anything? We'll put Rawson back in the talking place there, or parking lot, or whatever. But anybody else have anything from last night before we move on? And Jen, you want to continue?
So on my treasurer huddle this morning, I learned that the current budget bill's in the Senate and is being tweaked. They're trying to figure out how to make it work, funding. They're also debating on whether to merge the student wellness money back into the general fund or not. We don't have any answers on that. So there's really no big news yet on the state budget. But I promised I would share my information, so.
Thank you. So I think we dealt with what we needed to do regarding the budget from that standpoint. Do we need to now move on, if everybody's comfortable, to the 5-year forecast overview?
All right, so we'll be presenting the forecast on Monday night for approval to submit by the end of May as required by ODE. I saw a first draft of it this morning, and I have some questions that haven't been able to address yet, so I'm not comfortable sharing the draft yet. But revenues are down a little bit, mostly I think because of the casino dollars are down because of the closure. But they're not down as much as our expenses. Our spending rate is down as well. So I think we're probably going to put more cash on the table than we'd originally forecasted in November. I'm just not exactly sure how much that's going to be, but it will certainly help that closing that gap for next year's budget a little bit. And it kind of depends on how the casino revenues on all our revenue sources will rebound or not. That was kind of a new phenomena for us, so we'll continue to look at it, but I'll share more information Monday night. Not significantly different, but there is a couple questions that I'm just not comfortable presenting information yet.
Okay. So we will be voting on that on Monday?
Yes.
And will you have an extensive presentation regarding the 5-year forecast?
Yes.
Good.
As extensive as you want it, but yes.
Oh, well, within reason. I'm just saying that, you know, often we have a little bit more info on it, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, this is just a weird week. Everything's crunching at the same time, so it's hard to focus. Yeah.
Of course. Ms. Bates or Mr. Messer, do you have anything else from last night or any inquiry about finances?
No, I have to say I thought it was extremely well done, and I appreciate all the work of, you know, it's kind of magical to me to like see all the discussions we have turn into something very tangible, beautifully laid out, hit on lots of things, and then now it just was a beautiful plan and a really nice job last evening. So thank you to the administration, Laura for leading the high level what, and Jen for figuring out how we pay for all of it.
Yeah, we make a good partner. I'm going to miss her.
Yes.
Amen.
We
Can I just
all will.
a quick update on Walnut? So I just spoke with the principal. He said there was a wait list to just kind of keep track of how many kids were meeting the criteria. All of the CPS children who live in the district who met the criteria will be admitted, and parents are going to be notified on Monday. So all kids will be getting in who met the criteria. No wait list.
Wonderful.
That's good news. Ms. Bates?
That's very good news. So that will alleviate a lot of tension and anxiety in that community. So that's great.
All right. I don't know if we're ready to go to other, but we're getting close, are we not?
We're ready.
5-year forecast written.
Yeah.
We've got the financial monthly reports that have been published and ready to be posted.
Yeah, and everything's right on track where we expected them to be, so there's no anomalies that we need to deal with on that.
Then we have the post-COVID CARES Act fund financially. You've caught us up on that last night, I think.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that is good news or not good news, but welcome news that we know what we better understand what we have to be doing regarding the engagement and the way to expedite that? I would hope that we can use new ways to do that, not just the old ways, and maybe less time consuming. Maybe we have established more networks of communication. Mr. Messer would know better than I about that as to how we can expedite it and also make it much more wholesome and fulsome. And maybe, Ryan, you can be thinking about that, if you don't mind. Because we need to do it fast, and we need to do it well, and at least it's specific to what we're doing. And I would like to see people talk in terms of Melanie's point from previously of divesting ourselves. Now, she and I will argue about whether that's Rawson or whether it's from downtown or, Reading Road or what have you. But we do need to generate some funds in order to do a lot of this stuff. Anything else? Okay, we know what we're going to carry forward. And then now if we can do the other, we are doing well. Jen, I think these are your items to add to the effort.
Yes. So there's 3 things under other business, and they're really quick. So you recall the last month's Finance Committee, I asked the Finance Committee board members to consider allowing a change in the level of authority that I have to process purchase orders and contracts without board approval, but then would follow up as board information in the next treasurer's report. And I asked that, so I'm asking for the level to go from $25,000 per event to $50,000 per event. We collected some data, as I promised I would, and so I have this great chart, and I'm happy to send it to you, but we figured out that out of the, put my glasses on, 1,190 transactions from July 1st through April 5th is when this data got collected. 90 of those contracts and purchase orders happened on Wednesdays of Treasury Report Wednesdays of the meetings, but because you're no longer doing Wednesday board meetings with action, those 90 activities would be delayed at least a week or 2, depending on when the next board meeting fell. And I'm concerned about delaying services to kids, particularly around now, and summer scholars are ramping up trying to put purchase orders in place and contracts in place for service. So I submit that request. If not, a permanent change, maybe a temporary change for the next year or for a period of time, just to give me a little bit of more ability to act faster. But maintaining full compliance and transparency in the treasurer's report, but just after the fact.
Mr. Messer and Ms. Bates, how do you feel about that? If you're understanding what she's saying, Ms. Bates.
No, I think that's fine as long as we get the information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do now for the things under 25,000. It's in a different page on the treasurer's report. It's called for board information, so you at least see it anyway. But this just will help us keep performance going.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Mr. Messer, you're good with that?
Fully supportive.
Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is put a little blurb in the treasurer's report, giving me that authority, so I have documentation for an audit trail.
Yes.
Okay.
Rather than a resolution.
Correct. In the treasurer's report, just a little blurb.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. And what's your other items? You have two
Item
more?
number 2 is another appropriations resolutions coming through. We received a little bit more money on and a new grant, and then another allocation on another grant, and then the third one is we're adding a CARES appropriation because we've now spent down CARES 1 and we need to dip into CARES 2, but I haven't appropriated that yet, so we're gonna do that. That's that. That appropriations resolution will come through Monday night. And then the third item is kind of an unusual thing in that the principal at Hughes High School was contacted, and the Alumni Association wants us to donate their stadium. She's replacing some chairs in their ILC or their stadium or auditorium. And they want the ones that are being torn out to be donated to the alumni group so they can go sell them and generate funds to support Hughes and those Hughes activities. And so she contacted legal counsel, and he thought that we had the authority to do that, to donate old stuff like that. But in the spirit of transparency, I want to put a blurb in the treasurer's report just to document it so that when people see people out there selling our equipment, they'll know it's all in the up and up, so to speak. That make sense?
Makes good sense.
I think it's a great idea. I just want to make sure that done in the proper and transparent format.
Right, and the only thing to worry about is just which group is taking control of that, and that we always have to keep that separate.
Yes.
It's not the school, it's this, but it's us, it's the alumni or whomever using school property
right
to make that money. Just if Dan can really double check that, I think that makes sense. I will testify that is a great fundraiser, having redone an old auditorium, having spent the night at the old auditorium as the old chairs were taken out and the new chairs were put in. Let me tell you, it's a big deal. And I know that the Oiler people thought about that, but then those were just so hard to replace in that auditorium. It's a great plan.
I don't think Dan's still on the call, but when it comes up when the treasurer's report comes on the floor, we'll have him speak to it.
That would be good. And then also, I think we want to, since FCC is now started too, we may want to have some kind of an update or reassuring us regarding parking at Taft and who's running that for money for the school or whomever.
You know what? That reminds me that you remember in our agreement with them, the pilot agreement with them, is that once the value of the stadium really got calculated, we would have to adjust their payment. And so now that they're actually open, we need to have that evaluation done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll call Jeff Birding tomorrow.
Well, absolutely. And just give him a call. Keep in mind too that we want to we did get that heads up that some developers in Northside were going to try to keep us from getting our due with that condo apartment complex there in Hamilton and Blue Rock. And we haven't heard, Superintendent, we haven't heard an update on that from General Counsel, and we may want to. I know he looked into it already, but that would be helpful because this is like only the second or third month that they're even using the new agreement. I mean, a lot of that stuff we passed was still on the old agreement. So if you can worry about that for us, that would be great. Anybody else have
And one
any
has
other?
to wonder,
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank goodness you'd heard about that. I mean, what else is out there?
Right.
I think that's one that, we should look at that one, but I think we should send an official notification to the city to say, we found this by accident.
Yep.
And it doesn't represent good faith on your side that this somehow is being let slip through. How can we work together to avoid this holistically going forward? It was shocking to me, and it was just because you found out about it. So what else is there out there? So I think it's, potentially an opportunity for us to communicate to the city partners and say, look, this happened. How can we work together to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Exactly. Since some of it was apparently accredited that the city was aware of it and had endorsed it. Now we only know that indirectly, but the other we know very directly. So, and that's part of that engagement piece, and we all play that role. That was a citizen with caring about whether or not we were going to get our fair due, and had some information and knowledge, and even a city person that wanted to make sure we were getting our due. So, Ryan, you're right. We need to be very, very assertive about enforcing these agreements that we have. Any other items for the good of the order?
I saw the superintendent's hand.
Madam Superintendent, I'm going to say that every chance I get until you're gone. Madam Superintendent.
Just really quickly on the city piece. So we just had a call with the city again this week where they outlined some things and we outlined some things that we wanted to discuss. So for example, Wi-Fi for the city is something that we discussed with them. The crossing guards, there were the SROs, so there were a series of things. But this topic might be a really good one to bring up with the staff. And so we agreed that we would meet on about a monthly basis. And so we've already had 2 meetings to work through some specific items. And so this one I think is another good item to put on that agenda. Great. And the city manager was on that first call. So I'll put this down.
Thank you.
Yep.
I know there's great support. I know Mr. Messer and Ms. Bates have been very supportive of us having that kind of relationship and liaison and ongoing efforts. Anything else that we need to talk about? I am interested about closing that gap and making the decisions that you all are making as to how we proceed, because I think we are still very determined not to have to go back for new money any sooner than we planned. I think this would be a deadly thing to do to folks that are coming out of this COVID and a few of the things that have been there. So good luck and keep us informed and as to how we draw down that gap. Anything else? Superintendent, treasurer, members? Well, hearing no objection, I guess I have to adjourn. So there you go. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye. Everybody and Mel, have a good trip. Aren't you having a trip or something? You're muted, so that's probably better.
I said I'm